The door slammed behind us. He was too close. Too fast. The hallway of that quiet old bookstore felt like it had shrunk. Outside, Sacramento's sun had dipped low, leaving orange streaks across the dusty windows. I took a step back, heart thudding. He didn't move. His eyes scanned mine, searching, waiting. For what? Permission? Courage? No one else was in that aisle, just the faded smell of old paperbacks, a buzzing silence between us, and that unspoken edge we'd been circling for weeks. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words tangled. He leaned slightly forward. I didn't move. And right when it felt like the floor was about to fall out beneath us. Let me start from the beginning. Before I begin the story and tell you how everything really happened, answer this question: would you be able to forgive a loved one's betrayal? 4th of July was always the same in our neighborhood, plastic flags stuck into flower beds, the scent of hot dogs riding the breeze, and coolers lined up like suburban soldiers. My husband was out back, beer in hand, talking loudly over classic rock with his oldest friend. The one who always brought a six-pack and the same 2 stories. The one who'd spent more time in our home over the years than any of my own relatives. I was refilling the lemonade pitcher when I noticed it, a glance. Not the kind of glance people accidentally throw when the sun's in their eyes. This one lingered. Direct. My hands fumbled with the cap of the lemonade bottle. I looked away, focused on the ice melting in the glass bowl. But I felt it again, his eyes. Backyard chatter carried on like nothing was out of place. Kids from down the street were chasing each other with sparklers, someone lit a citronella candle, and a Springsteen song was cracking from a Bluetooth speaker near the grill. My husband turned toward me once and gave a quick smile. I smiled back. A practiced one. It wasn't the first time I'd caught his friend watching me. But it was the first time I didn't immediately look away. Later, as dusk folded over the backyard and firework crackles echoed from somewhere over the river, I was inside washing dishes. The kitchen window overlooked the party, still lit by lanterns and the warmth of small-town laughter. I heard the front door creak open. Then close. Barely a second later, my phone buzzed on the counter beside me. You looked distracted today. Everything okay? I stared at the message. He must have just stepped outside to send it. A flush of something I didn't want to name worked up my chest. I didn't answer. Not then. That night, in bed, my husband fell asleep quickly, snoring by the time the 10 o'clock news wrapped. I lay still, my phone inches away, that message still unread. Still pulsing in my mind. The next morning was a grocery run. Regular stuff. Paper towels, eggs, coffee. At Safeway, we split up to make it quicker. I was halfway through the cereal aisle when a voice behind me said, "You always get that brand?" I turned. It was him. I mumbled something about habits. He smiled, easy, like this meeting meant nothing. Like he hadn't messaged me last night knowing full well I was in bed next to his best friend. Fate keeps throwing us together, huh? I faked a chuckle, picked up a box of cereal I didn't even want, and walked toward the dairy section. But I knew he followed me. I could feel it in the way I didn't want to turn around. He didn't say anything else. But when we stood by the fridge doors, me grabbing milk, him pretending to browse yogurt, he said quietly, "If you ever want to talk about anything." Again, I didn't respond. But I didn't say no either. The rest of the day dragged. My husband didn't ask where I went in the store. He didn't notice that I was distracted. Or maybe he did, but decided not to say anything. That was more his style. Keep the peace. Let things simmer down. By late afternoon, I was pacing around the living room, pretending to dust shelves I'd already cleaned yesterday. My phone lit up. I might take you up on that coffee offer. Just coffee. His reply came fast. How about somewhere quiet? We settled on the Book Nook, an old used bookstore just outside the city. It had a corner cafe, nothing fancy, just muffins that tasted like fridge air and bitter coffee in chipped mugs. But it was quiet. Familiar. Safe. Or so I thought. The next morning, I parked 3 blocks away and walked. I told myself it was to stretch my legs. But it was really to calm my nerves. When I pushed the door open, the bell above chimed once. He was already there, sitting near the window with 2 cappuccinos and a look that said he'd been waiting longer than he claimed. I sat down. My throat was dry. He slid the cup toward me. Thought you'd want the one with cinnamon, he said. I hadn't told him that. Not in words. The conversation felt light at first, talk of books we'd never read and towns we wished we'd visited. He didn't mention my husband. I didn't mention the backyard. But every sentence felt like it was balancing on something unspoken. A tightrope neither of us dared name yet. When I reached for my cup, our fingers brushed. I pulled back. He didn't. By the time we got up to leave, the tension was stitched so tight between us, I could barely look at him. Outside, the sun had turned harsh, bouncing off the hood of my car. I unlocked the door and turned to say goodbye. He stepped closer. Too close. That's when I heard it. You and your jazz, he said suddenly, as if trying to disguise what had nearly just happened. What? I asked, voice low. You mentioned once you loved Ella. Back at that party last year. I remembered. I nodded, unsure of anything anymore. He looked around, then leaned in, lowering his voice to something only I could hear. Let's keep this our little thing. No need to get your husband's nerves involved, right? I didn't respond. But I didn't stop him either. That night, as I rinsed dishes again and watched my husband settle into his recliner, a single thought took root, cold and solid. It had already begun. I just hadn't admitted it yet. And by the time I would, it might be too late. The drive home from the cafe felt longer than it should have. The air conditioning in the car was too cold, but I didn't reach to adjust it. I needed the chill, the sharpness against my skin, something to cut through the warmth still humming in my chest. The moment outside the bookstore wouldn't stop looping in my head, not just what almost happened, but what didn't. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun had dipped behind the row of houses. My husband was on the porch, finishing a phone call, laughing about something I didn't catch. He waved, holding the phone out toward me like he'd just told someone I'd arrived, but I walked past him with a smile and said I needed to start dinner. He didn't question it. That night was like any other. A TV dinner and reruns of Wheel of Fortune. He sat in his recliner, I folded laundry. Routine. Safe. I laughed at the right moments, asked about his day, and nodded at stories I'd heard in different versions 100 times. He didn't notice the difference. Or maybe he did, and chose not to acknowledge it. Later, lying in bed while he snored softly beside me, I stared at the ceiling and replayed everything. The message. The coffee. The way he looked at me like I wasn't invisible. The quiet thrill of being seen, truly seen, not as someone's wife, not as a part of furniture, but as a woman. I told myself it had to stop there. A harmless line. A short-lived indulgence. But the next morning, while scrolling through the grocery list on my phone, another message arrived. Still thinking about your eyes yesterday. I didn't reply. I stared at it, locked my phone, unlocked it again. Deleted the message. But the words had already settled into the back of my mind. By late afternoon, I told my husband I needed to pick up a few things from Target. He was in the garage, tinkering with something under the hood of his car. He grunted and waved me off without looking up. I drove aimlessly at first, turning left when I meant to turn right. Somewhere along the way, I texted him back, "Meet me at the park." The old park on 19th was nearly empty when I pulled in. A jogger passed me by the entrance. A woman walked her golden retriever near the benches. It smelled faintly of cut grass and dusty mulch. He arrived a few minutes later, wearing the same confidence he always did, like nothing was fragile. He handed me a pastry from my favorite bakery, the one I'd once mentioned in passing at a barbecue, and hadn't visited since last fall. I wanted to ask how he remembered. I didn't. We sat on a bench just past the trees, out of view from the main path. He talked about nothing. Old songs. The lake house his cousin was renovating. The cafe's new owners. I barely responded. Just listened. Watched his hands as he gestured. Watched the way he tilted his head when he smiled. The conversation turned when he asked, "So what is this for you?" I turned toward him, blinking. I didn't have an answer. "Escape," he said quietly, answering himself. Then he looked directly at me. "And you?" My throat tightened. I stood, saying I needed to get home. But I didn't walk away. Not yet. We kissed. On the drive back, my fingers trembled against the steering wheel. Every red light felt like it lasted hours. I couldn't stop checking the rearview mirror as if something would follow me home. My face felt hot. I kept hearing his voice, the word escape lingering longer than the kiss ever did. My husband was setting the table when I returned. He greeted me with a tired smile and asked if I remembered to grab trash bags. I had, but I told him I forgot. He offered to get them tomorrow. I told him not to worry. While we ate, he told me a story about someone he ran into at Lowe's. I nodded and chewed slowly. At one point, he asked, "Why are you smiling?" I didn't even realize I was. "Just thinking about something funny at the store," I said. Later that evening, I sat on the porch after he'd gone to bed. The sky was clear, stars fighting through the city haze. I played the message again. His voice, soft and unhurried. Still buzzing from earlier. Dangerous. But damn, it felt real. I didn't reply. I deleted the message. The next day passed in a blur. Work, errands, a brief visit with a neighbor who needed help moving a flower pot. Everything normal. Everything quiet. Until I received the message. "Your husband invited me to dinner Friday. What should I wear for our little act?" I froze. I stared at the screen for several minutes, the words flickering in my mind like a faulty bulb. I hadn't mentioned anything about dinner. I hadn't even known about it. I walked into the kitchen where my husband was chopping onions. "You invited him over?" I asked casually. He nodded. "Thought it'd be good to catch up. It's been a while." I nodded too. Then excused myself to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub, the porcelain cold against my skin. That Friday, he arrived 5 minutes early. Wore a soft gray shirt, sleeves rolled just enough. My husband greeted him like a brother. The night unfolded like nothing was out of the ordinary. They talked baseball. Grill brands. Old camping trips. At one point, I noticed their beer bottles mirrored each other, identical gestures, identical chuckles. I felt like I was watching a life from the outside. Dinner was lemon chicken with roasted potatoes. I oversalted the chicken. While clearing plates, I felt him behind me in the kitchen, not saying a word. Just close enough to notice. just close enough for everything unsaid to fill the air. My husband came in behind him and asked about dessert. I mumbled something about store-bought cheesecake. No one noticed my hands shaking as I sliced it. Later, as my husband took out the trash, he leaned toward me near the sink. Warehouse tomorrow. Midday. Quiet as a grave. I didn't answer. But I didn't say no. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat on the living room floor and stared at the empty cheesecake box for a long time. The house was still. The clock ticked like a metronome. Everything was shifting. Slowly. Subtly. And then the twist I didn't see coming. The next morning, a notification came through, a hotel reservation, booked under my name. Half Moon Bay. One night. Just us. The email sat in my inbox like a landmine. Reservation confirmed, Half Moon Bay Inn. One night. Queen's Suite. My name on the booking, not his. No message attached. No emoji. Just a location and a timestamp. He knew exactly what he was doing. I closed the laptop slowly, my hand hovering above the touchpad for a moment too long. My husband was in the backyard, yelling at the lawnmower again. I watched him through the kitchen window, the way he wiped sweat from his forehead with the hem of his old college t-shirt, the way he cursed the gas tank like it had wronged him personally. The guilt should have outweighed the excitement, but it didn't. That afternoon passed in a blur. I baked banana bread I didn't want, reorganized a drawer that didn't need it, walked the dog twice even though she clearly didn't feel like it. I waited until evening, until the house settled and the silence returned. Then I messaged him, "Why Half Moon Bay?" The reply came instantly, "Because it's far enough to feel like another life. But close enough to still go home." The next morning, I told my husband I was staying over at a friend's house. She'd recently had surgery, minor, but enough to warrant an overnight visit. He didn't ask which friend. He didn't even look up from his phone. Just nodded and said, "Tell her I said hi." The lie slid out of me like something well-rehearsed. I left before lunch. Took the longer highway, the one that snaked along the coast. I turned off the radio halfway there. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter the closer I got. At some point I noticed I was speeding, but I didn't slow down. When I pulled into the inn's small gravel parking lot, I sat in the car for 10 minutes before opening the door. He wasn't outside. No dramatic entrance, no lingering glances in the rear view. Just a quiet inn and the scent of salt water blowing in off the Pacific. Inside, he was already at the check-in counter. He didn't turn when I entered. I stepped beside him without saying a word. He signed the form. I watched the pen move. When we got to the room, I set my purse down on the nearest chair. The window faced the ocean. The late afternoon light poured across the carpet in long, warm beams. He didn't speak. Neither did I. Dinner was at a tiny seafood restaurant a block down. One of those places with chalkboard menus and tables covered in butcher paper. He ordered for both of us. I didn't correct him. He remembered everything, the wine I liked, the salad I hated, the way I always pushed the bread basket aside and then reached for it anyway 10 minutes later. We didn't talk about anything important. Just the restaurant's quirky decor, the old couple 2 tables down who kept falling asleep between bites, the server's nervous laugh. But under all of it was a current. A humming tension we pretended not to hear. Back at the room, the light had changed. The ocean outside was black now, alive and restless. Inside, everything was still. We kissed. We spent night together. In the morning, I woke up before him. The room was quiet. The kind of quiet that only exists in hotel rooms, where nothing has history, and nothing belongs to you. The ocean was still audible through the slightly open window, rhythmic and steady like breathing. I sat up slowly. His phone was on the bedside table, screen glowing faintly with a new message. I didn't intend to look. I told myself I wouldn't. But my eyes landed on the preview before I could turn away. Miss you too. 3 words. No name. No context. But my stomach dropped. I didn't wake him. I didn't move. Just sat there, staring at the phone until the screen went dark again. A small part of me whispered excuses. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it meant nothing. But another part, the part one couldn't silence anymore, knew better. By the time he stirred, I was in the bathroom, brushing my teeth with the hotel's cheap disposable toothbrush. He came in behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, kissed my shoulder like none of it was real. We packed slowly. Neither of us said much. On the way out, he suggested we stop at a roadside diner for pancakes. I said I wasn't hungry. He smiled, said, next time then. Somewhere even riskier. I didn't respond. The drive home was unbearable. Traffic was heavier than expected. The heat pressed through the windshield like a weight. Every stoplight, every roadside billboard, every stretch of gray asphalt felt like a punishment. But it wasn't until I turned onto our street that my chest fully tightened. His car was parked 3 houses down. Not from the day before. Now. I slowed as I passed it, trying not to stare. It was unmistakably his. Same dent near the front bumper. Same cracked taillight. Parked casually, like it belonged there. I pulled into our driveway. Sat in the car for a minute, heart thudding. My husband's car wasn't in the driveway. He was probably at work. The house looked undisturbed. The neighborhood, quiet. I got out slowly, walking up the steps with measured breaths. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, closed it behind me. I dropped my purse on the floor and moved to the kitchen window, peeking between the blinds. His car was still there. I waited. 10 minutes passed. 15. Then he appeared. From the side of the street. Not walking toward my house. Walking away. He hadn't come for me. He hadn't even tried. He walked to his car, unlocked it, got in, and drove off. No message. No explanation. Nothing. I stood there in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by yesterday's laundry and the faint scent of banana bread that had long gone stale. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely, undeniably alone. The silence in the house was unbearable. Even the clock above the kitchen stove seemed louder than usual, each tick echoing through the room like a judgment. I hadn't moved from the window since he drove off. His taillights disappeared around the bend, and still, I stood there, motionless, trying to make sense of what I just saw. Why was he in my neighborhood? Why didn't he come to the door? Why did he leave without a word? The question looped in my mind like a skipping record. I picked up my phone twice and set it back down both times. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound pathetic. He had made his choice, showed up just long enough to be seen, then vanished like none of it mattered. Maybe it never did. Maybe it only mattered to me. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the house felt magnified. I imagined my husband noticing something I missed. A smell, a movement, a hesitation. But he didn't. When he came home from work, he tossed his keys in the bowl, cracked open a LaCroix, and turned on the TV like it was just another day. I watched him from the hallway, wondering if I was the only one spinning in this quiet disaster. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. A fluke. A coincidence. I had to believe that. Otherwise, the alternative was too messy to even consider. The next evening, just before sunset, my husband asked if we should invite him over for dinner sometime soon. I dropped the dish towel mid-wipe. My voice came out too quickly. Didn't we just see him? He shrugged. Yeah, but it's been a while since he stayed over. Maybe Friday? I nodded slowly, hiding the tightness in my chest. Sure. Friday's fine. Friday came like a train you don't hear until it's already on top of you. I cooked chicken stir-fry and overcompensated with garlic. The smell filled the house, sharp and unforgiving. My husband opened a bottle of wine that had been sitting in the pantry for a year, said it was a good night for something nice. He arrived at 7 sharp. He looked the same, like he hadn't spent the last few days ignoring me. No hesitation, no awkwardness. He hugged my husband like a brother, complimented the wine, complimented the food, complimented me. I avoided his eyes. Dinner was a performance. He and my husband laughed about some college road trip they barely remembered. I nodded and chimed in at the right times, refilling glasses, clearing plates. I was floating somewhere above the scene, watching myself smile and stir and pour, pretending not to feel the weight pressing down from somewhere I couldn't name. After dinner, my husband left to take a call in the garage. We stood in the kitchen alone. He leaned against the counter like it was his home too. Like we hadn't spent an entire night together in Half Moon Bay, and like he hadn't left without a word. I rinsed a plate. The water ran too hot, burning my fingers. I didn't flinch. You okay? He asked finally. I nodded once. You didn't text. I was busy, he said simply. Life's complicated. I didn't respond. He waited a beat, then added, you knew what this was. I dried my hands and turned to him. Did I? Before he could answer, my husband came back in, laughing about something from the call. The conversation shifted. He stayed the night, like he used to. Guest room. Toothbrush already waiting in the drawer. Pajamas he'd left there months ago still folded in the dresser. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while my husband snored beside me. At some point in the night, I got up to get water. On my way back down the hall, I passed the guest room. The door was slightly open. I didn't stop. I didn't even glance in. I just kept walking. The next morning, he joined us for breakfast like nothing happened. My husband read the news on his phone while I made coffee and eggs. The pan sizzled. The kitchen smelled like routine. After he left, I went upstairs to tidy up the guest room. The bed was made. The towel he used hung neatly over the rack in the bathroom. I walked into my bedroom, gathering laundry from the floor. That's when I saw it. A shirt. His shirt. Not in the guest room, but in mine. Lying on the chair near my side of the bed. I froze. I stared at it for a long time. My stomach twisted. My thoughts scrambled. Had he left it there intentionally? Was it some kind of message? A warning? A slip? I picked it up, slowly, carefully, like it might bite. It smelled like his cologne. The same one from Half Moon Bay. The same one that clung to the pillows that morning. I shoved it in the laundry basket and carried it downstairs like it was on fire. My husband walked in just as I was loading the washer. He glanced at the basket. Is that his shirt? He asked casually. I nodded too quickly. Yeah, he must have mixed it up with ours. I found it near the guest bed. He shrugged. Weird. He walked to the fridge, pulled out juice, poured a glass. I stood by the washer, heart pounding so loudly I was afraid it would echo. Then he said, strange though. I saw it on the chair in our room this morning. He didn't look at me. Just took a sip and walked away. The sound of the refrigerator door shutting behind him was louder than it should have been. Everything around me slowed. The basket. The washer. The glass of juice in his hand. He saw it. He noticed. And he said nothing, just enough to let me know. That night, I sat on the porch while the sun went down and the wind picked up. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't the only one quietly watching anymore. The way he said it wasn't the problem. It was how he said it, offhand, like he was pointing out a misplaced sock or a burned-out light bulb. Not angry. Not suspicious. Just observant. I saw it on the chair in our room this morning. And then he walked away. That night, I couldn't sit still. I moved from room to room, tidying things that didn't need tidying. I wiped the kitchen counters 3 times. Rearranged the bookshelf. Took the trash out early even though it wasn't full. He watched me from the couch, his expression unreadable. The weight of that one sentence sat with me like a shadow. He'd seen it. He knew. Or at least suspected. But if he truly knew, why didn't he say more? I wanted him to confront me. I wanted him to scream. To throw something. To call me out. But instead, he carried on like nothing had happened. And that, somehow, was worse. The next morning, I told him I was heading out early for errands. He didn't ask where. I drove without a destination. For a while, I just circled the neighborhood. Then I parked in front of a closed coffee shop and sat in the car with the engine running, staring through the windshield at nothing. At noon, I pulled into the industrial district, past the abandoned rail yard and the dusty rows of warehouses. His was the third on the right, low brick, 1 window, a warped metal door. I hadn't been there since the day we kissed in the quiet, sitting side by side on a crate like it was a bench in a park. This time, he didn't look surprised to see me. He was inside, sorting through a stack of old chairs. When I stepped through the door, he looked up, didn't smile. "I figured you'd come," he said. "I had to get out of the house," I replied. We didn't speak for a while. He offered me a bottle of water. I didn't take it. The warehouse smelled like dust and sawdust and something faintly chemical. I paced between the furniture, trailing my hand along a shelf that held rusted tools and a crooked lamp. He watched me from a distance. Eventually he said, "You've been different." I didn't answer. He walked closer, voice lower now. "I don't mean just lately. I mean since the beginning. You used to know what you wanted." I finally turned toward him. "Did I?" "You're not here because you're confused," he said. "You're here because you already made your choice." I stared at him. "Did you?" He didn't respond. He just picked up a paint-stained rag from the workbench and started wiping his hands, like the conversation didn't deserve his full attention. The rest of the day passed slowly. When I got home, my husband was in the garage again. I peeked in as I walked by. He was at his workbench, sorting through a drawer of screws. He looked up, met my eyes, then went right back to what he was doing. At dinner, we barely spoke. He chewed with mechanical rhythm. I forced myself to swallow food that tasted like sand. Afterward, he stood up, stretched, and said he was turning in early. The clock said it was barely 8. I stayed downstairs, pacing the length of the kitchen until I was too tired to think. In the middle of the night, I woke up to use the bathroom. The hallway was dark, but the guest room door was open. I glanced inside. Empty. Of course. But the room didn't feel empty. It felt expectant. 2 days later, my husband suggested a spontaneous trip to visit his sister in Santa Barbara. A weekend away. I agreed immediately. I needed space, even if it came with him. I packed light. We drove together in silence most of the way. On the second night, after dinner with his sister's family, I stepped outside for air. The coastal breeze was crisp, carrying the scent of eucalyptus and grilled meat. I leaned on the porch railing, staring out at the dark ocean in the distance. My husband came out behind me. "You've been quiet lately," he said. I nodded. He didn't push. The drive back home was even quieter than the ride there. The house felt different when we returned. He went straight to the backyard to water the plants. I went to the laundry room and started a load of clothes, even though our bags were barely unpacked. Later that night, he was at the dining table on his laptop. I passed by behind him, carrying folded towels. I didn't mean to look. But I did. His screen was open to Facebook. He was logged into my account. I froze mid-step. He didn't turn around. He scrolled slowly, methodically, eyes fixed on the screen. I opened my mouth but nothing came out. He clicked on a thread, an old message. I didn't even remember what it said. Then he clicked another. Then another. I dropped the towels. He finally turned his head, just enough to glance over his shoulder. "You forgot to log out," he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. I couldn't breathe. He stood up, walked past me without another word, and disappeared into the hallway. I stood there in the middle of the house, towels still at my feet, heart pounding like a siren between my ribs. The silence was over. The towels stayed on the floor. I stood frozen, still facing the chair he had just left, listening to the faint sound of his footsteps retreating down the hall. I didn't follow. I didn't speak. There was nothing to say that wouldn't crack the air open even wider. The silence between us wasn't quiet anymore, it was loaded, tight, buzzing like a power line. I stared at the screen. My own name. My own messages. My own words, lined up like a confession in black and blue. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't demanded. That single sentence, "You forgot to log out," had shattered more than any scream ever could. I gathered the towels with shaking hands, went to the laundry room, and dropped them inside the machine without turning it on. I pressed my palms against the cold metal lid and closed my eyes. There was no going back now. The next day passed like walking through fog. He moved around the house with practiced indifference, calm, measured, polite. He made coffee. He asked if I needed anything from the store. He filled the bird feeder in the backyard. I watched him from the window, trying to guess what he was thinking. There was no trace of fury. No sign of breakdown. Just a man who had already decided something. At lunch, we sat across from each other at the kitchen table. He talked about the weather. I nodded. I couldn't taste the soup. Every spoonful felt like glass. He looked at me once, only once, but it was enough. There was distance in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Distance and finality. That afternoon, I messaged him. He didn't respond. A full hour passed. Then another. By sunset, I gave up and left the house. I told myself I needed a walk. I didn't tell my husband where I was going, and he didn't ask. I walked 3 blocks, then turned back. I paced the backyard. I watered plants that didn't need watering. I sat on the porch steps and stared at the street, wondering what I was hoping to see. My phone buzzed just after 9. One line. Told you it was dangerous. That's all. I stared at the words for several minutes, until my screen dimmed and shut off. The next morning, I drove to his warehouse. His car was parked out front. The garage door was half open. Inside, the lights were on, but the space was empty. I stepped inside slowly, the familiar scent of dust and oil making my stomach tighten. He was in the back, moving boxes. He saw me, nodded once, but didn't stop what he was doing. "I need to talk," I said. He kept stacking. "We already did. Not like this." He paused, finally turning toward me. "You really want to do this here?" I nodded. He walked past me, wiped his hands on a rag, and leaned against the work table near the front. I stood a few feet away, arms crossed without meaning to. "I'm not asking you to fix anything," I said. "I just—" "You knew what this was," he interrupted. "You don't get to rewrite the story now. I didn't know it would go this far." He laughed, short and sharp. "You were the one who kept showing up." I swallowed. "You left me in that room." "You left yourself there," he said, grabbing a bottle of water and twisting the cap. "You made the same choice I did. We both walked into it. Don't act like I dragged you." I stepped back. "Was it ever real for you?" He didn't answer. And that silence told me everything. I left before he could say anything else. At home, I avoided my husband all evening. I cooked. I cleaned the kitchen twice. I reorganized the spice rack. At one point, I caught him watching me from the living room. When our eyes met, he looked away and muted the television. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in slow, steady circles. I thought about every step that led here, every glance, every excuse, every moment I could have stopped but didn't. I woke up early and drove to Santa Rosa to visit my sister. She didn't ask many questions. I told her I needed air, space, quiet. She offered me tea and didn't press. We sat on her deck for most of the afternoon, listening to the wind rattle the wind chimes. It felt almost like peace. Almost. When I returned home late that Sunday, the house was dim. A few lights were on. My husband's car was in the driveway. I stepped inside slowly, expecting silence. But instead, I found him at the dining table. Laptop open. Eyes locked on the screen. He didn't look up when I entered. I stood frozen in the doorway, waiting for him to say something. Anything. Then he slowly turned the screen toward me. I walked closer. There were messages, our thread. All of it. Not just Facebook. Texts. Photos. Dates. He had everything. I didn't know how. My voice barely came out. "How did you?" He cut me off, not with words, but with a look. Calm. Cold. Clear. Then he said, "I read your messages. That's all. No accusation. No shouting. Just a statement." I wanted to speak. To explain. But I realized there was nothing to explain. Nothing I could say that would undo what he now knew. He stood up, pushed the chair back quietly, and walked past me. As he did, I reached for his arm, desperate to find something to hold on to. He gently pulled away. "No more lies," he said. And then he disappeared into the hallway, leaving the laptop open behind him. I stood alone in the half-lit room, surrounded by everything I'd tried to keep hidden, now dragged out and blinking in the glow of a screen. There was no misunderstanding left. He had seen it all. I didn't move for a long time. The glow of the laptop screen still lit the corner of the room, casting my own words back at me like a mirror I couldn't look away from. I hadn't known how much he'd read, or when he started reading, but it didn't matter anymore. He knew enough. More than enough. The hallway swallowed the sound of his footsteps, the soft brush of his socks across the floor, the click of a door shutting in the distance. I stared at the empty doorway for another full minute, trying to catch my breath. Then I reached out and quietly closed the laptop, as if that alone could undo the damage. Upstairs, the house was dark. I didn't go to our room. I didn't knock. I went into the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed where his friend had once slept just days ago. The room still smelled faintly like cedar and detergent. I looked around slowly, eyes lingering on the folded blanket, the extra pillow, the framed photograph on the nightstand. A picture of the three of us at some barbecue 2 summers ago, smiling, laughing, looking like the perfect little trio. I wanted to tear it from the frame. Instead, I lay down fully clothed and waited for morning. When I came down for coffee, he was already at the table. Dressed, composed, sipping black coffee from his usual ceramic mug. He didn't say anything when I walked in. I poured my cup in silence. The air felt like ice, even though it was already 74 degrees outside. We went through the motions. Toast. Newspaper. He asked if I needed the car that day. I said no. He said he'd be working late. I nodded. That was it. Everything inside me wanted to scream, to apologize, to beg him to say something more. But I knew better. His silence wasn't confusion. It was clarity. After he left, I wandered the house like it didn't belong to me anymore. I sat on the back steps, watched the wind rattle the patio umbrella, listened to the neighbors' wind chimes clatter in messy rhythm. My hands shook and I didn't know if it was from shame or fear or both. I texted him. The man I had risked everything for. He didn't reply. I waited 5 hours before trying again. Just one line. I need to see you. Still nothing. That night, my husband didn't come home for dinner. He sent a single message at 6:47 p.m., "Don't wait up." I reread it 10 times, searching for some clue of emotion. There wasn't any. It felt less like a sentence and more like a door quietly closing. I didn't sleep. By the next morning, I knew I couldn't sit still any longer. I got in the car and drove. Past the grocery store, the bakery, the park bench where we'd first sat side by side. I passed the intersection where he'd reached for my hand for the first time, and the streetlight where I almost turned around and didn't. His warehouse was closed. The roll-up door locked tight. No lights on inside. His car wasn't parked out front. I stood outside it for 10 full minutes, waiting for something. Anything. I knocked once. No answer. I walked around the building. Nothing. Defeated, I drove home and stared at my phone for the rest of the afternoon. He never responded. The realization hit slowly, then all at once. He was gone. That night, my husband came home after 9. I was sitting at the kitchen table, unmoving. The house was spotless. Dinner had gone cold hours ago. He walked in, dropped his keys in the bowl, took off his shoes like always. I stood up, ready to speak. But before I could say a word, he walked past me. Not a glance. Not a breath of acknowledgement. Just passed by and headed upstairs. I followed him. He was already in the bedroom, setting his phone on the nightstand, removing his watch. Calm, measured, the same way he moved through every routine. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. He didn't turn. I didn't mean for it to become what it did. Still nothing. I ended it. He looked at me finally. His eyes weren't angry, they were tired. Deeply, irreversibly tired. "I'm not sure that matters anymore," he said. I stepped closer. "Please talk to me." He shook his head, gently, like someone turning down a drink they couldn't stomach. "I don't think I have anything left to say." He pulled the blanket over his side and lay down, turning away from me. That simple motion cut deeper than any words. I stood in the doorway for a long time. When I woke up the next morning, he was gone. I checked every room. His car keys were missing. His overnight bag was missing. But nothing else. No note. No explanation. I waited all day. I texted him once, no answer. Late that evening, the doorbell rang. I opened it expecting him. But it wasn't him. Instead, a courier handed me a slim white envelope. No return address. No markings. Just my name in careful black ink. Inside, one page. Printed neatly. Appointment confirmed with divorce attorney, Tuesday 10:30 a.m. No signature. No threats. Just facts. The next morning, I called the number listed. It was real. And he was on the calendar. I sat on the floor in the kitchen, back pressed to the cabinet, holding that page in my hands while the sun rose through the window. The light felt too clean for what was happening. Too pure. I wanted the day to stay dark. But then came the twist I never saw coming. Just as I stood up to pour myself coffee, my phone buzzed. A new email notification. The subject line, "You've been removed from the shared bank account." And before I could even react, another notification popped up. A call. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. A woman's voice on the other end. Calm. Sharp. Certain. "You don't know me," she said, "but I know everything." And the line went dead. The line went dead, but the words clung to me like cold water. You don't know me, but I know everything. I stood in the center of the kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear long after the silence returned. The screen eventually dimmed, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. There was no name, no face to connect to that voice. But it wasn't the mystery that scared me. It was the certainty. The calm in her tone. Not a threat. Not a warning. Just truth, spoken like a verdict. My first instinct was to call back, but there was no number, just no caller ID. I scrolled through my recent calls 3 times, hoping maybe it had slipped through as a mistake. It hadn't. The house felt smaller. Like the walls were listening. I dropped the phone onto the counter and backed away from it like it might ring again. Everything was spinning now. Faster than I could keep up. I opened my laptop. Logged into the bank account again, even though I already knew. My name was gone. Just his remained. My accessor gone. Years of financial planning, of joint accounts, of shared responsibility, deleted with a single click. My stomach turned. I pressed my fingers into the edge of the counter just to feel something real. A drawer was slightly ajar. One I didn't remember opening. Inside, a folder. Not mine. I reached for it with hesitation I didn't understand, opened it slowly. Inside were printed screenshots. Emails. Messages. Photos. Our photos. From Half Moon Bay. From the cafe. From the park. Every single place we thought we were alone. I dropped the folder, took a step back. The papers scattered across the floor like autumn leaves, each one a nail in something that was already dead. He had printed everything. Laid it out like evidence. Not for confrontation. Not for revenge. For closure. The sound of my own breathing filled the space now. Shallow, uneven, unfamiliar. I gathered the papers as best I could, shoved them back into the folder, stuffed the folder into the drawer and slammed it shut like I could make it all disappear again. But it was too late. It had already happened. Everything had already collapsed. This was just the settling dust. I went upstairs. The bed was still unmade. His pillow still cold. The closet looked emptier than before. I stared at the small gap between his shirts, where a suitcase had clearly been pulled out, packed, and taken. I opened the bathroom drawer. His toothbrush was gone. His razor. His cologne. Even his vitamins. Gone. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, trying to steady my thoughts. I replayed the last week in my head like flipping through a book I didn't want to finish. The warnings were all there. The moments I ignored. The silences I chalked up to stress. He wasn't unraveling. He was preparing. And I never saw it. The email. The call. The folder. All of it layered, methodical, final. By the afternoon, I stopped waiting for him to come home. I left the house and drove with no plan. I ended up at the Book Nook Cafe, the same one where this entire story started. The bell above the door still jingled the same way. The same dusty smell of old paper still hung in the air. A couple sat near the window, whispering over coffee. I took the booth near the back, the one he'd chosen that first day. I didn't order anything. I just sat there and stared out the window. I watched a father and his teenage daughter carry a stack of books to their car. I watched a woman walk past with a baby stroller. I watched the sky darken slightly, clouds rolling in off the hills. It had all felt like possibility once. Now it just felt like proof of how easily I'd let something real slip away. When I finally returned home, the streetlights were on. The mailbox was stuffed. I pulled out the letters, sorted through them with shaking hands, utility bills, junk, a catalog, and one thick white envelope. No name. Just the address. I opened it on the porch steps. Inside, a signed document from the attorney's office. Not a copy. The original. The divorce papers. Already filed. Already processed. Just needing my signature. I stared at the space where my name belonged. The line where I was supposed to accept it. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I was hollow now, like the part of me that felt had been slowly leaking out since the moment I decided to cross a line I thought I could manage. I sat there until my legs went numb, then finally stood and walked back inside. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a museum to a version of me I couldn't relate to. I placed the envelope on the kitchen counter. Walked to the sink. Poured a glass of water. Drank it slowly. My phone buzzed once. An email. From him. Not my husband. The other him. Subject, Denver next month. Message, if you really need to talk, I'll be around. No apology. No explanation. Just that. I stared at it. Then blocked the address. That night, I walked through every room in the house, slowly, touching nothing. I opened drawers. Turned on lights. Then off again. I stood at the front door for a long while, hand on the knob. But I didn't leave. I climbed the stairs. Laid on the guest bed. Closed my eyes. And waited. But sleep didn't come. It never really does anymore.